"Mom, you look like a mess." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs as I stood in the doorway of my own home in Brooklyn. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to open up like this. My name is Dorothy, and at 73, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I understood what family meant. I was wrong about everything. That Tuesday morning in October, I had been up since 5 a.m., just like every day for the past 50 years. My arthritic fingers worked through the familiar routine, brewing coffee in the same ceramic pot my late husband Frank had given me for our 20th anniversary, arranging fresh flowers I'd bought with my Social Security check, smoothing the tablecloth that had seen countless family dinners. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains I'd sewn myself, casting gentle shadows across the small kitchen where I'd fed 3 generations of my family. I was wearing my favorite navy cardigan, the one with tiny pearl buttons that Frank used to say brought out my eyes, over a simple floral dress I'd pressed the night before. My silver hair was freshly styled from my weekly appointment at Rosa's beauty salon, where I'd been going for 30 years. Every Tuesday, Rosa would tell me how elegant I looked, how some women were just born with grace. I believed her. I believed I still had something beautiful to offer. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:30 a.m. My heart fluttered with anticipation. My son Michael had called the night before, saying he needed to stop by and discuss something important. In my naive optimism, I imagined family news. Maybe Sarah was pregnant again. Maybe they'd finally decided to move closer to me. Maybe my grandson Tommy, now 15, wanted to spend more time with his grandmother. I opened the door with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in months. Michael stood there in his expensive charcoal suit, his briefcase clutched tightly in his manicured hand. Behind him, Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her designer heels, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her lips pressed into a thin line of barely concealed impatience. Tommy lurked behind them both, his eyes glued to his phone screen, as if acknowledging my presence required more energy than he possessed. "Mom, you look like a mess," Michael said, his voice carrying the same tone he used when discussing quarterly reports at his Manhattan law firm. His eyes swept over me with clinical assessment, taking in my carefully chosen outfit, my styled hair, the small pearl earrings I'd put on just for their visit. "We need to talk about your situation." The word situation hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt my smile crack and crumble, the way old paint peels from weathered wood. Sarah stepped around me into my living room without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd polished until they gleamed. Tommy followed, still staring at his phone, as if my home was just another inconvenient stop on his busy teenage schedule. "What situation?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question felt dangerous, like opening a door I might not be able to close again. Michael set his briefcase on my coffee table, the same table where I'd served him hot chocolate after school for 12 years, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and kissed away his tears. The leather case looked foreign and threatening against the familiar crocheted doily I'd made during one of those long, lonely evenings after Frank passed. "Mom, you're 73 years old," he began, pulling out a folder thick with official-looking documents. "You're living alone in this big house. You're clearly not taking care of yourself properly. Sarah and I have been discussing this, and we think it's time you considered other options." Other options. The phrase echoed in my mind like a funeral bell. I sank into my favorite armchair, the one Frank had bought me for my 60th birthday, where I'd rocked all my grandchildren to sleep, where I'd spent countless evenings reading and dreaming, and hoping for visits that came less and less frequently. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. "I'm fine. I take care of myself. I take care of this house. I've been taking care of everything just fine." Sarah let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so cold. "Dorothy, honey," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that makes your teeth ache. "You're not fine. Look at this place. Look at yourself. It's time to be realistic about what you can and can't handle." I looked around my living room, the room where I'd hosted birthday parties and Christmas mornings, where I'd comforted Michael through his divorce from his first wife, where I'd celebrated his marriage to Sarah with champagne and homemade cake. The furniture was older, yes, but it was clean and well-maintained. The walls held decades of family photos, each one a testament to the love I'd poured into every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. "We've found a really nice place," Michael continued, his lawyer voice in full effect. "Sunset Manor has excellent reviews. 3 meals a day, activities, other people your age. You'd be much happier there, Mom. Much safer." Sunset Manor. I'd driven past it countless times. A beige building with narrow windows and a parking lot full of cars that never seemed to move. I'd seen the residents sitting in the lobby, staring at a television that played game shows no one was watching. I'd seen their faces, vacant, resigned, waiting for visits that came less and less frequently. "I don't want to go to Sunset Manor," I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a growing sense of panic. "I want to stay in my home. Frank and I built our life here. My memories are here. My garden is here. Everything I love is here." Tommy looked up from his phone for the first time since they'd arrived. "Grandma, it's just a house," he said with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can deliver. "You can make new memories anywhere. Just a house." I felt something break inside my chest, a sound like old china hitting concrete. This wasn't just a house. It was the place where I'd brought my babies home from the hospital, where I'd taught them to walk and talk and tie their shoes. It was where Frank had proposed on a snowy Christmas Eve, where we'd celebrated our golden anniversary just 2 years before he passed. It was where I'd grieved and healed and learned to live alone without losing myself completely. "Besides," Sarah added, examining her manicured nails, "the house is too much for you to maintain. The yard needs work, the roof probably needs repairs. Wouldn't it be better to sell while you still can, before it becomes a burden?" A burden. The word hit me like a slap. I'd spent my entire adult life making sure I was never a burden to anyone. I'd raised 3 children while working part-time at the local library. I'd cared for Frank through his battle with cancer without complaint. I'd helped Michael through law school with every penny I could spare. I'd babysat Tommy and his sister Emma countless times, feeding them, loving them, giving Sarah and Michael the freedom to build their careers and their lives. When had I become the burden? "I've been taking care of myself for 3 years now," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to remain calm. "I pay my bills on time. I keep my house clean. I drive to the grocery store and the doctor's office. I'm not helpless." Michael's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. "Mom, we love you," he said, and I wanted to believe him. "We just want what's best for you. We want you to be safe and happy." But his definition of safety felt like a cage, and his version of happiness looked like surrender. As they spread brochures across my coffee table, glossy photos of smiling elderly people engaged in crafts and gentle exercise, I felt the walls of my 73 years of life closing in around me. The faces in the photos looked content, but their eyes were empty. They'd traded independence for security, autonomy for comfort, the beautiful struggle of living for the gentle numbness of being cared for. "We'll help you pack," Sarah said, her voice businesslike now that the emotional manipulation was complete. "We can have you moved in by next month. Tommy can help carry boxes, can't you, honey?" Tommy shrugged, already returning to his phone. "I guess." I looked at this boy I'd loved since the moment he was born, who'd spent countless afternoons in this very room, building blanket forts and listening to stories about his grandfather. Now he couldn't even look at me directly, as if my aging face was somehow offensive to his young eyes. "I need time to think," I said, though we all knew there was nothing to think about. The decision had been made without me, by people who claimed to love me but couldn't see me. "Of course," Michael said, closing his briefcase with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel. "But don't take too long, Mom. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be." They left as abruptly as they'd arrived, their expensive shoes clicking across my floor like a countdown to something I couldn't name. Sarah kissed my cheek with lips that felt cold against my skin. Tommy waved without looking back. Michael hugged me, and I breathed in the cologne he'd worn since college. remembering when that scent meant comfort and safety instead of judgment and disappointment. After they left, I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by the echoes of their visit. The brochures lay scattered across my coffee table like fallen leaves, each one promising a different version of the same ending: a small room, scheduled activities, other people's decisions about what I should eat and when I should sleep. I picked up one of the brochures with shaking hands. Sunset Manor, where every day is a new beginning. The tagline felt like a lie wrapped in hope. Every day would be the same, I knew. Every day would be one step closer to forgetting who I used to be. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house in the darkness, my fingertips tracing the surfaces I'd touched for 50 years. The kitchen counter where I'd kneaded bread every Sunday morning. The banister Frank had sanded and stained with his own hands. The bedroom where I'd rocked my babies to sleep and held my husband's hand as he slipped away from me. At 3 a.m., I found myself in the guest room, staring at the boxes of photo albums I'd organized and reorganized countless times. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, school plays and graduation ceremonies, wedding dances and baby showers. Every photo told the story of a woman who'd given everything she had to the people she loved most. I opened one album at random and found a picture of Michael at age 8, gap-toothed and grinning, wearing the Batman costume I'd sewn for him when store-bought costumes were beyond our budget. He was looking at me with such adoration, such complete trust, as if I were the most important person in his entire world. When had that changed? When had I become someone to be managed instead of someone to be loved? I closed the album and returned to my bed, Frank's pillow still on his side, still holding the faint scent of his aftershave after all these years. I pulled it close to my chest and whispered into the darkness, "Frank, I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am if I'm not taking care of our family. I don't know how to be Dorothy if I'm not taking care of our home." But Frank was gone, and I was alone with a decision that felt like choosing between two different kinds of death: the slow death of institutionalization, or the quick death of defying the people I'd built my life around. As dawn broke through my bedroom window, painting the walls with soft golden light, I made myself a promise. I would not go quietly into that beige building with its narrow windows and scheduled activities. I would not become another empty face in another brochure. I would fight for my right to remain Dorothy, complicated, inconvenient, beautifully human Dorothy, even if it meant fighting the people I loved most, even if it meant fighting alone. The morning after their visit, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours ago, staring at the checkbook that told the story of my life in neat columns of numbers. Each entry was a memory, a choice, a piece of myself I'd given away believing it would come back to me as love. $500 to Michael's law school textbooks when he was struggling in his second year. Fund $200 for Tommy's summer camp when Sarah insisted he needed enriching experiences. $800 for Emma's dance recital costume because all the other mothers are contributing, Dorothy. $2,000 for their family vacation to Disney World. A trip I wasn't invited on but was expected to help fund. I flipped through page after page of my own handwriting, each check a small surrender. The deposit for Michael's wedding reception, the down payment for their first house, the emergency loan when Sarah's boutique was failing, Tommy's braces, Emma's piano lessons, birthday gifts, Christmas presents, Easter outfits. When had giving become expected? When had my love become currency? I remembered the day Michael graduated from law school, how he'd hugged me in his cap and gown, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done this without you." I'd felt so proud, so necessary. Frank had been gone for only 6 months then, and seeing our son succeed felt like proof that my sacrifices had meaning. But yesterday, when I'd mentioned helping with his education, Michael had waved it off like an annoying detail. "That was years ago, Mom. I've paid my own way since then." Paid his own way. With the job I'd helped him secure by working double shifts at the library to pay for his bar exam prep course. With the confidence I'd built by believing in him when he wanted to quit. With the foundation I'd provided by never, ever asking for anything back. I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet that still held Frank's clothes. I'd kept them there for 3 years, not because I couldn't let go, but because Michael had said he wanted to go through them when he had time. That time had never come. Instead, I'd received a text last Christmas. Just donate Dad's stuff. We don't need it. We don't need it. We don't need him. We don't need the memories or the history, or the man who'd worked 60-hour weeks to give his family everything they wanted. I pulled out Frank's Navy uniform, the one he'd worn in our wedding photos, still pressed and ready as if he might walk through the door and need it. The ribbons and medals caught the morning light. Purple heart, bronze star, ribbons that represented sacrifices no one remembered anymore. I held the jacket against my chest and breathed in the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with the lavender sachets I'd placed in every drawer. They want to put me away, Frank. I whispered to the empty room. Our son thinks I'm a mess. Our grandson can't look at me. And Sarah's been planning this for months, I think. The phone rang, interrupting my conversation with ghosts. I recognized the number. Emma, my 17-year-old granddaughter. My heart lifted slightly. Emma had always been different, more sensitive, more aware of others' feelings. Hi, Grandma. Emma's voice was careful, controlled. Mom said you had a family meeting yesterday. Is that what we're calling it? I asked, settling into the chair by the window where I'd spent countless hours reading to her when she was small. Grandma, I think maybe they're right. You've been alone for so long, and that house is really big for just one person. Sunset Manor has really good reviews online. They have a book club and everything. A book club. As if that could replace the library where I'd worked for 30 years, where I'd introduced thousands of children to their first favorite books. As if scheduled activities could fill the void where my independence used to live. Emma, honey, do you remember when you were 8 and you had pneumonia? You stayed here for 2 weeks because your parents were both traveling for work. Yeah, I remember. I slept in the chair next to your bed every night. I made you soup and read you stories and held your hand when you were scared. Do you remember feeling like a burden then? Silence stretched between us. Finally, Emma's voice came back, smaller now. That's different, Grandma. You were helping me get better. This is about helping you. Transition. Another euphemism for disappearing gracefully. I loved taking care of you, I said. It wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. But apparently, when you're young and sick, you deserve care and patience. When you're old and healthy, you deserve to be warehoused. Grandma, that's not fair. They're trying to help. Are they? Or are they trying to solve a problem they created by neglecting me? Emma hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the phone, wondering when I'd become the kind of grandmother who made her granddaughter uncomfortable with truth. The afternoon brought another visitor. Sarah, this time alone, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone handling an unpleasant but necessary task. She'd changed from her morning outfit into jeans and a sweater, casual clothes that were supposed to make this feel friendly instead of professional. Dorothy, I brought some paperwork for you to review, she said, settling onto my couch without invitation. The sooner we get this process started, the easier it'll be for everyone. She spread documents across my coffee table. Admission forms, medical authorizations, financial disclosure statements. Each page felt like a step toward erasure. I've already spoken with the admissions coordinator, Sarah continued, checking items off her list. They can have you moved in by November 1st. That gives us 3 weeks to get the house ready for sale. I haven't agreed to sell the house. Sarah's smile was patient but strained. Dorothy, you can't afford to maintain it from Sunset Manor. The property taxes alone are more than your Social Security check. It's not practical. Practical. The word that had governed Sarah's entire approach to our family. She'd married Michael for practical reasons. He had a stable career, good earning potential, respectable social connections. She'd had children at practical intervals. She'd chosen their house in a practical neighborhood with practical schools. And now she was being practical about disposing of me. This house is paid for, I said. Frank and I worked for 30 years to pay off this mortgage. We sacrificed vacations and new cars and nice clothes so our children would inherit something valuable. But that's just it, Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone she used when explaining simple concepts to Emma. You're not dead yet. You need to use your assets to take care of yourself. That's what they're for. Not dead yet. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge. I wasn't dead yet, but I was supposed to act like I was dying. I was supposed to liquidate my life, surrender my independence, and disappear into institutional care so my family could get on with their lives without the inconvenience of my existence. What about the things that can't be sold? I asked. The photo albums, the family heirlooms, Frank's military decorations. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. We'll take what we want. The rest can go to charity or the dump. You can't take much with you anyway. The rooms at Sunset Manor are pretty small. The rest can go to the dump. 50 years of marriage, 30 years of child rearing, a lifetime of memories reduced to what could fit in a small room with a narrow bed and a single window. I'd like to think about this more, I said, gathering the papers into a stack. Dorothy, thinking about it won't change the facts. You're 73 years old. You live alone. You don't drive at night anymore. You forgot to pay your electric bill last month. I was 2 days late because I was in the hospital having my knee replacement surgery. The same surgery none of you visited me for. Sarah's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but she recovered quickly. We sent flowers. Flowers. They'd sent flowers to the hospital room where I'd spent 3 days alone, watching other patients receive visits from children and grandchildren who acted like their presence was a gift instead of an obligation. The point is, Sarah continued, you're showing signs of decline. It's better to make these decisions while you still can, rather than waiting until there's a crisis. Signs of decline. Being 2 days late on a bill while recovering from surgery. Living alone by choice instead of desperation. Maintaining my independence instead of surrendering it to people who confused control with care. That evening, I found myself in the basement, surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations I'd collected over 5 decades. Each ornament told a story. The handprint angels my children had made in kindergarten, the baby's first Christmas decorations I'd bought for each grandchild, the elegant glass balls Frank had given me for our 10th anniversary. I opened one box and found the stockings I'd knitted for everyone, bright red wool with white cuffs, each one carefully embroidered with names in gold thread. Dorothy, Frank, Michael, Lisa, Sarah, Tommy, Emma. 7 stockings for 7 people who'd gathered around my fireplace every Christmas morning for 20 years. Until 3 years ago, when Sarah had decided they needed to start their own traditions at their house. Now my stockings hung empty on my mantel, decorating a holiday that no one came to celebrate. I pulled out Michael's stocking, remembering the Christmas morning when he was 12 and had whispered to me, "Mom, I hope I never have to move away from you." I'd hugged him tight, believing that love was permanent, that the bonds we'd built were strong enough to survive anything. But love, I was learning, was conditional. It lasted as long as you were useful, as long as you were convenient, as long as you didn't require too much in return. I climbed the stairs slowly, my replaced knee aching from the damp October weather. In the kitchen, I made myself a sandwich, turkey and cheese on bread that was starting to go stale, and ate it standing at the counter, looking out at the backyard where I'd pushed my children on swings and taught them to ride bicycles. The garden was still beautiful, even in autumn. The roses Frank had planted for our anniversary bloomed late into the season, their petals scattered across the grass like confetti from a celebration no one had attended. The maple tree we'd planted when Michael was born stretched its branches toward the sky, its leaves bright gold in the fading light. All of it would be gone soon. Sold to strangers who would never know that the rosebush by the back fence had been Frank's Mother's Day gift to me in 1987, or that the stone path leading to the garden shed had been laid by Michael and his father the summer before he left for college. As darkness fell, and the house settled into its evening quiet, I sat in Frank's chair and tried to remember when I'd stopped being a person and started being a problem. When had my family's love become so fragile that my aging was a threat to it? I thought about the checkbook upstairs, with its record of decades of giving. I thought about the empty stockings on my mantel and the clothes in my closet that no one wanted. I thought about the Sunset Manor brochure promising a new beginning that looked suspiciously like an ending. And for the first time in my adult life, I wondered what would happen if I stopped giving. If I stopped being the woman who said yes to every request, who opened her wallet and her heart to people who measured her worth by her usefulness. Was I used? The question formed in my mind like a crack in a dam, small but growing larger with each passing moment. Had I spent 50 years buying love with sacrifice, only to discover that the price kept going up while the returns kept getting smaller? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and scattering the rose petals across the lawn. I pulled Frank's favorite blanket around my shoulders and closed my eyes, listening to the sounds of the house where I'd learned to be a mother, a wife, a grandmother. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether to fight for the right to remain myself or surrender to their definition of what my life should look like in its final chapters. But tonight, I was still Dorothy, still the woman who'd raised children and buried a husband and survived every crisis life had thrown at her, still the woman who deserved better than to be discarded like an outdated appliance when she became inconvenient. Still the woman who was beginning to understand that love shouldn't cost everything you have to give. The discovery came on a gray Thursday morning when I was looking for my insurance papers to review Sarah's practical suggestions about my healthcare coverage. In the back of Frank's desk drawer, behind old tax returns and expired warranties, my fingers found something that made my blood run cold. A folder labeled Mom's Situation in Michael's precise handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing months of planning I'd known nothing about. Email printouts between Michael and Sarah, dating back to January, 8 months before their sudden concern about my well-being. Real estate assessments of my house. Brochures from not just Sunset Manor, but 6 different facilities across Brooklyn and Queens. A detailed financial analysis of my assets, including bank account balances I'd never shared with anyone. The first email, dated January 15th, was from Sarah to Michael. Your mother called 3 times this week. She's getting more needy and it's affecting our family time. We need to discuss long-term solutions before this becomes a bigger problem. Michael's response, I know. She's been texting me constantly about Tommy's grades and asking when we're coming to visit. It's like she doesn't understand we have our own lives now. I sank into Frank's chair, the same chair where he'd paid our bills and planned our future, and read through months of correspondence that revealed how my children saw me. Not as a mother who loved them, but as a problem to be solved. Not as a woman who'd sacrificed everything for their happiness, but as an inconvenience, threatening their peace. Email after email detailed their strategy. Sarah had researched my Social Security benefits and calculated my monthly expenses. Michael had contacted a real estate agent about market values in my neighborhood. They'd even discussed which of my belongings they wanted to claim before the inevitable move to assisted living. The most devastating message was from Michael to Sarah, dated just 3 weeks ago. I found a place that accepts Medicaid after the spend down. If we can get her assets transferred correctly, she'll qualify for financial assistance within 6 months. The house sale should cover the initial costs. A Medicaid spend down. They weren't just planning to warehouse me, they were planning to impoverish me first. Take everything Frank and I had worked for, liquidate our life's work, and leave me dependent on government assistance so they could inherit nothing while paying nothing for my care. I stumbled to the bathroom, where I barely made it to the toilet before vomiting up the tea and toast I'd managed to eat for breakfast. My reflection in the mirror looked haunted. Hollow eyes, pale skin, the face of a woman who'd just discovered that her entire world was built on lies. When had I become so naive? When had I stopped seeing the signs that my own children were conspiring against me? The phone rang, piercing through my shock. Michael's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. How could I talk to him now, knowing what I knew? Hi, Mom. His voice was cheerful, casual, as if he hadn't spent months planning my destruction. Just checking in. How are you feeling about everything we discussed? I'm fine, I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Good. Sarah and I were thinking we could come by this weekend to start going through some of your things. You know, help you decide what's worth keeping and what can be donated. What's worth keeping. He was talking about the contents of my life as if they were garage sale items. The china cabinet that had been my mother's wedding gift. The hope chest I'd filled with linens for my own marriage. The photo albums documenting every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone in our family's history. I don't think I'm ready for that yet, I said. Mom, we talked about this. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. It's better to just rip the Band-Aid off, you know? Rip the Band-Aid off. As if dismantling my entire life was a minor inconvenience, a small pain to be endured and quickly forgotten. I need more time. Michael's sigh was audible through the phone. Time isn't going to change anything, Mom. You're still going to be 73. You're still going to be alone in that big house. You're still going to need more care than you can manage by yourself. I manage fine. Do you? Because Emma mentioned you seemed confused when she called yesterday. And Mrs. Patterson from next door said you've been forgetting to bring in your garbage cans. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 25 years, who'd apparently been reporting my minor lapses to my son like a prison warden. The garbage cans I'd forgotten once, the morning after my sleepless night reading their correspondence, when I'd been too devastated to remember mundane tasks. I forgot the garbage cans one time, Michael. That doesn't mean I'm incompetent. It's not just the garbage cans, Mom. It's everything. The way you look, the way you sound, the way you're fighting this decision that's obviously best for everyone involved. Best for everyone involved. Including the son who'd inherit nothing but wouldn't have to pay for my care. Including the daughter-in-law who'd finally be free of my needy phone calls. Including the grandchildren who wouldn't have to pretend they enjoyed visiting their deteriorating grandmother. I have to go, I said, hanging up before he could respond. The rest of the day passed in a blur of devastating realizations. I wandered through my house, seeing it through their eyes for the first time. The wallpaper that looked dated instead of classic. The furniture that seemed shabby instead of comfortable. The accumulation of a lifetime that they viewed as clutter to be disposed of. I found myself in the living room, staring at the family portrait we'd taken for our last Christmas card. Frank and me in the center, surrounded by our children and grandchildren. We all looked so happy, so connected, so permanent. But it had been a lie, a performance for the camera while underneath, they were already planning my exile. Evening brought another visitor, Tommy, my 15-year-old grandson, carrying a backpack and wearing the sullen expression that had become his permanent mask around me. He'd grown 6 inches in the past year. His voice had deepened, and he'd developed the particular brand of adolescent cruelty that cuts deeper than any adult insult. "Mom sent me to get some stuff from the basement," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She said you have some old video games down there." "What stuff?" "Just some things that used to be Dad's when he was a kid. Games and comics and whatever. Used to be Dad's. Michael's childhood treasures, stored carefully in plastic bins, waiting for the day when Tommy might be interested in his father's history. Now they were just stuff to be collected before I became too inconvenient to access. "They're in the blue bins on the left side," I said, following him down the basement stairs I'd climbed thousands of times. Tommy moved through the basement like a scavenger, pulling out items with no regard for their history or meaning. The comic books Michael had collected with his allowance money, the baseball glove Frank had given him for his 8th birthday, the model airplanes they'd built together during those precious Saturday afternoons when time seemed infinite. "Can I ask you something, Tommy?" He looked up from a box of old Nintendo games, his expression guarded. "I guess. Do you remember when you were little, when you used to spend summers here? We'd make pancakes every morning and you'd help me tend the garden?" His face softened slightly. "Yeah, I remember. Do you remember how you used to tell me you loved me every night before bed? How you'd crawl into my lap and ask me to read you one more story? Grandma, I was like 5 years old. You were. And I was 68. But I wasn't too old to love you then. I wasn't too old to take care of you, to make you feel safe and happy. When did I become too old to deserve the same consideration?" Tommy's hands stilled on the box he was packing. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sweet child he'd been, the boy who'd followed me around the house like a shadow, who'd called me his best friend. And meant it. "It's different now," he said quietly. You're getting older. Mom says you forget things and get confused sometimes. I'm getting older, but I'm still the same person who loved you when you were small. I'm still the same grandmother who taught you to bake cookies and helped you with your homework. The only thing that's changed is how you see me." He resumed packing, his movements more aggressive now. "Look, Grandma, I don't know what you want me to say. Sunset Manor looks pretty nice. They have activities and other people your age. You might be happier there. Would you be happier in a place where strangers decided when you could eat, What you could do, where you could go. That's not the same thing, isn't it? You're 15. You can't drive, you can't vote, you need your parents' permission for everything. But no one's suggesting you'd be happier in an institution with other teenagers, eating scheduled meals and participating in organized activities. Tommy's face flushed red. That's totally different and you know it. How? Because I'm going to grow up and get better. You're just going to get worse. The words hit me like a physical blow. Just going to get worse. Not aging with dignity, not living fully until the end, not contributing wisdom and experience to the world. Just deteriorating, declining, becoming more of a burden until I finally had the courtesy to die and free them from the obligation of pretending to love me. Tommy, I have to go, he said, hefting the box of his father's childhood memories. I have homework. He left me standing in the basement, surrounded by the archaeological layers of our family's history. Christmas decorations that would never be used again, photo albums that would be thrown away or donated, furniture that would be sold to strangers who would never know that the rocking chair by the window had been where I'd nursed my babies, where I'd sat vigil during their childhood illnesses, where I'd held my grandchildren when they were small enough to need comfort from their grandmother. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the phone that hadn't rung. 3 years ago, when Frank died, this same phone had rung constantly. Friends offering condolences, neighbors bringing casseroles, family members checking on me, making sure I wasn't alone in my grief. Now, when I was facing a different kind of death, the death of my independence, my dignity, my right to exist on my own terms, the phone stayed silent. The people who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health had decided that aging was a form of sickness that absolved them of their obligations. I thought about the folder upstairs, filled with months of planning I'd known nothing about, the careful calculations of my financial worth, the casual discussions of my neediness and confusion, the cold analysis of how to dispose of me with minimal cost and maximum convenience. At 3 a.m., I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in months. The woman staring back at me was 73 years old, with silver hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of laughter and tears. She was thinner than she'd been when Frank was alive, but not frail. Tired, but not defeated. You look like a mess, I whispered to my reflection, echoing Michael's words from days earlier. But as I studied my face, I realized something profound. I didn't look like a mess. I looked like a woman who'd been betrayed by the people she'd trusted most. I looked like someone who'd been systematically devalued and dismissed until she'd almost started to believe she deserved it. I looked like someone who was finally beginning to understand that she'd been used. The realization hit me like a physical force, doubling me over the sink as sobs tore from my chest. Decades of giving, of sacrificing, of putting everyone else's needs before my own. And this was my reward. A conspiracy to remove me from my own life, to steal my remaining years and warehouse me in a facility where I'd be someone else's problem. I cried for the woman who'd believed that love was unconditional. I cried for the mother who'd thought her children would protect her the way she'd protected them. I cried for the grandmother who'd imagined she'd be valued for her wisdom instead of discarded for her age. And then, as the tears finally stopped, I felt something new stirring in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger at people who'd taken my love and twisted it into obligation, who'd accepted my sacrifices as their due while planning my disposal, who'd looked at a woman who'd given them everything and decided she was worth nothing. I walked back to Frank's desk and picked up the folder that had destroyed my illusions. Instead of hiding it away, I spread the contents across the kitchen table, studying each email, each document, each piece of evidence that proved my children saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. For the first time in my adult life, I began to plan not what I could give, but what I could take away. They wanted to treat me like a burden? Fine. I would show them what a real burden looked like. They wanted to steal my assets and warehouse me in an institution? I would make sure they understood that I still had choices, still had power, still had the ability to make decisions about my own life. They thought I was confused and weak? They were about to discover that 73 years of life had taught me more about survival than they'd ever imagined. The sun was rising as I made my first real decision in months. I would not go quietly into their beige institution. I would not surrender my life's work to fund their convenience. I would not disappear just because my existence had become inconvenient. I was done being used. And I was about to make sure they understood exactly what they were losing. My first act of rebellion was surprisingly simple. When Michael called Friday morning with his usual update about moving forward with the transition, I said the word I'd been afraid to say for 73 years. No. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Michael finally spoke, his voice carried the bewildered tone of someone who'd just witnessed their most basic assumption about reality crumble. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not going to Sunset Manor. I'm not selling my house. I'm not surrendering my life to make yours more convenient. Mom, we've been through this. You can't just... I can. I am. This is my life, Michael. And I'm done letting you plan it for me. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the intoxicating rush of finally speaking my truth. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. Each ignored call felt like a small victory, a reclamation of my right to control my own time and attention. The voicemails, when I finally played them, revealed the full scope of their panic. Michael's voice grew increasingly agitated with each message. Mom, call me back. We need to talk about this rationally. Mom, you're being unreasonable. Just pick up the phone. Mom, I'm coming over there right now if you don't answer. He arrived within the hour, Sarah in tow, both of them wearing the grim expressions of people dealing with a crisis they hadn't anticipated. Michael's usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, as if my simple refusal had somehow disrupted the fundamental order of his universe. Mom, what's gotten into you? He demanded, brushing past me into the living room where the Sunset Manor brochures still lay scattered across my coffee table like evidence of a crime. Nothing's gotten into me, I said, following them but remaining standing while they sat on my couch like judges preparing to render a verdict. I've just decided to stop pretending that your plan is about helping me instead of helping yourselves. Sarah's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. Dorothy, that's not fair. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. Are you? Because I found the folder, Sarah. I read the emails. I know this has nothing to do with my well-being and everything to do with your convenience. Michael's face went pale. You went through my private papers? Private papers? They were in my husband's desk, in my house, about my life. Nothing about my future should be private from me. That's not the point, Michael said, standing and beginning to pace the same path across my living room carpet that he'd worn during his teenage years when he was preparing for difficult conversations. The point is that you're not thinking clearly about this situation. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. I'm thinking about why my son and his wife spent 8 months planning my disposal without including me in the conversation. It wasn't disposal, Sarah interjected, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining simple concepts to difficult people. It was planning. Someone has to think about these things, Dorothy. Someone has to be practical about the future. Someone has to be practical about stealing my assets and warehousing me in an institution, you mean? That's not what we're doing, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. We're trying to ensure you have proper care as you age. By liquidating everything my husband and I worked for? By making me dependent on Medicaid so you can inherit nothing while paying nothing? I read the emails, Michael. I know about the spend-down strategy. Michael stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression shifting from defensive to coldly professional. Mom, whether you like it or not, you're going to need care. The question is whether you're going to plan for it responsibly or wait until there's a crisis. I am planning for it responsibly. I'm planning to stay in my own home, maintain my independence, and make my own decisions about my care when and if I need it. That's not realistic, Sarah said, pulling out her phone and opening what appeared to be a notes app. We've researched this extensively. The statistics on elderly people living alone are alarming. Falls, medication errors, isolation-related depression. You're already showing signs of confusion and memory issues. What signs? The garbage cans, the late electric bill, The way you seemed disoriented when Emma called last week. I was disoriented because I'd just discovered that my family had been plotting against me for months. I forgot the garbage cans once because I was devastated by your betrayal. I was late on the electric bill because I was recovering from surgery alone while you sent flowers instead of visiting. Michael sat back down heavily, rubbing his temples. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being paranoid, Mom. You're interpreting normal family concern as some kind of conspiracy. Normal family concern would have included me in the conversation about my future. Normal family concern would have asked what I wanted instead of deciding what was convenient for you. We know what you want, Sarah said, her patience clearly wearing thin. You want to stay in this house forever, pretending nothing has changed. But that's not possible, Dorothy. You're getting older. Your needs are going to increase. We're trying to address that before it becomes a crisis. My needs. I laughed, the sound bitter in my own ears. You've never asked about my needs. You've asked about my limitations, my problems, my inconveniences. You've never asked what would make me happy or fulfilled or purposeful in my remaining years. Because happiness isn't the priority here, Michael said, his lawyer voice in full effect. Safety is the priority. Practical care is the priority. Making sure you don't end up isolated and neglected is the priority. Isolated and neglected? Michael, I've been isolated and neglected for 3 years. None of you visit unless you want something. None of you call unless you need something. None of you include me in your lives unless it's convenient. How is Sunset Manor going to be different except that you'll pay someone else to ignore me? The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Frank had bought for our 25th anniversary. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, communicating in the silent language of couples who'd had this conversation before. Mom, Michael said finally, his voice softer now. I know we haven't been as attentive as we should have been, but that's going to change. Once you're settled at Sunset Manor, we'll visit more often. The kids will come see you. You'll have activities and social opportunities you don't have here. You'll visit more often because I'll be conveniently located and you'll have scheduled visiting hours. You'll bring the kids because it'll be a quick, time-limited obligation instead of an open-ended commitment. You'll feel better about yourselves because you'll have solved the problem of caring for me without actually having to care for me. Sarah's composure finally cracked. Dorothy, this is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're twisting everything into some kind of attack. Maybe this is exactly why you need supervised care, because you're not thinking rationally anymore. I'm thinking rationally for the first time in years. I'm thinking about what I want instead of what you want. I'm thinking about my right to make decisions about my own life instead of your need to control them. You don't have unlimited rights, Michael said, standing again. If you become a danger to yourself or others, if you're not competent to make decisions, there are legal processes to address that. Legal processes. The threat hung in the air like a sword, sharp and gleaming. He was talking about guardianship, about having me declared incompetent, about stripping away my legal rights to make decisions about my own life. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. If you won't make responsible decisions about your care, other people will have to make them for you. Other people like you? Other people like the courts, if necessary. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son, the boy I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, was threatening to have me declared incompetent and stripped of my legal rights because I'd refused to surrender my independence voluntarily. Get out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom, get out! The words erupted from somewhere deep in my chest, carrying decades of suppressed rage and hurt. Get out of my house and don't come back until you remember that I'm your mother, not your problem to solve. Michael and Sarah gathered their papers and phones with the swift efficiency of people accustomed to making strategic retreats. At the door, Michael turned back, his expression a mixture of hurt and determination. This isn't over, Mom. We're not going to let you hurt yourself out of stubbornness. Hurt myself? Michael, you've been hurting me for months. You've been planning my imprisonment, stealing my dignity, and treating me like a burden. The only person who's been hurting me is you. After they left, I sat in my living room, shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been hope. I'd done it. I'd said no. I'd refused to be managed and manipulated and disposed of like an outdated appliance. But the victory felt hollow because I knew it was temporary. Michael's threat about legal processes wasn't empty. As a lawyer, he knew exactly how to have someone declared incompetent, how to strip away their rights, how to make their resistance irrelevant. The phone rang again. This time it was Emma, and her voice was tearful. "Grandma, Dad called me. He said you're refusing to get the help you need. He said you're being confused and paranoid, and that you might hurt yourself." "Emma, honey, I'm not confused. I'm angry. There's a difference." "But Grandma, why won't you just try Sunset Manor? Dad showed me the website. It looks really nice. You could make friends there." "Because I already have a home, Emma. I have a life here. I have memories and history and everything that makes me who I am. Why should I give all that up to live in a place where strangers will manage my meals and my activities and my social interactions? Because Dad says you're lonely. And he says the house is too big for you. And he says you're not taking care of yourself properly." Dad says. Everything filtered through Michael's interpretation, his assessment, his judgment about what was best for me. Even my own granddaughter couldn't see me except through the lens of his concern. "Emma, when you graduate from high school next year, are you going to let your parents choose your college, your major, your career, your friends? That's different." "How?" "Because I'm young, and I'm going to grow and learn and become more independent. You're old, and you're going to need more help." Old. The word that explained everything, that justified everything, that made my preferences irrelevant and my resistance evidence of incompetence. I may be old, Emma, but I'm still a person. I still have the right to make choices about my own life. I still deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. But what if you fall? What if you have a heart attack? What if something happens and no one's there to help you? What if you get in a car accident? What if you fail your classes? What if you make bad decisions about boys or drugs or college? Should we lock you up somewhere safe to prevent all the things that might go wrong? Grandma, that's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. You're asking me to give up my freedom because something bad might happen. You're asking me to surrender my right to take risks, to make mistakes, to live on my own terms. Emma was crying now, her voice thick with tears and frustration. "I don't want anything bad to happen to you. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart. But love doesn't mean protecting someone from life itself. Love means respecting their right to live their own life, even if that life includes risks and difficulties. Dad says you're being selfish. Maybe I am. Maybe it's time for me to be selfish after spending 73 years putting everyone else's needs first." After Emma hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, surrounded by the familiar shapes of furniture and memories. Outside, the October wind was picking up, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering across the front yard. I thought about Michael's threat, about legal processes and competency hearings, and the possibility that my refusal to cooperate might be used as evidence of my mental decline. I thought about Emma's tears and Tommy's indifference, and Sarah's cold calculations. But I also thought about the way my heart had felt when I'd finally said no, when I'd finally claimed my right to make decisions about my own life. I thought about the dignity that came with resistance, even futile resistance. For the first time in months, I felt like Dorothy again. Not the problem to be solved or the burden to be managed, but the woman who'd survived 73 years of life's challenges and still had fight left in her. I wasn't going to surrender quietly. I wasn't going to make their job easy. If they wanted to destroy me, they were going to have to work for it, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they were destroying. The morning after I threw them out of my house, I woke up to something I hadn't experienced in months. Silence. Not the oppressive silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of a woman who'd finally stopped waiting for a phone to ring with demands, complaints, or careful manipulations disguised as concern. I lay in bed for an extra hour, not because I was tired, but because I could. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, no one to please, no obligations to fulfill except the ones I chose for myself. The October sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, painting golden rectangles across the quilt Frank's mother had made for our wedding. I made coffee in my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that Sarah had repeatedly suggested I throw away because it looked shabby. I sat at my kitchen table in my bathrobe, not because I was depressed or couldn't manage to get dressed, but because I wanted to savor this moment of absolute freedom from judgment. The silence felt revolutionary. By noon, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to the bank, not to discuss asset liquidation or Medicaid spend downs, but to understand exactly what I owned, what I controlled, and what power I still had over my own life. The Bank of Brooklyn had been my financial home for 37 years. I'd opened my first checking account there as a young mother, deposited Frank's paychecks, saved for the children's college funds, and built the modest nest egg that Michael and Sarah had been so eager to redistribute. Margaret Chen, the branch manager, greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism that made me remember why I'd chosen this bank decades ago. She was about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes that suggested she understood the complexities of aging in a world that preferred to ignore the elderly. "Mrs. Morrison, it's so nice to see you. How can I help you today? I need to understand my financial situation completely," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "All my accounts, all my assets, all my options." Margaret nodded, as if this were the most natural request in the world. "Of course. Let me pull up your accounts." As she typed, I felt a flutter of nerves. Michael had always handled our family finances, first alongside Frank, then by himself after Frank's death. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning his management of my money, never asking for detailed explanations of investment strategies or account balances. "You have quite a solid financial foundation," Margaret said, turning her screen toward me. "Your checking account, your savings account, your IRA, and the proceeds from your husband's life insurance policy. All told, you have approximately $247,000 in liquid assets. $247,000. More than I'd realized, more than Michael had led me to believe when he'd discussed the necessity of liquidating my assets for nursing home care. And my house? Based on recent comparable sales in your neighborhood, I'd estimate your property value at around $425,000. You own it free and clear, correct?" "Yes. Frank and I paid off the mortgage 15 years ago." Margaret smiled. "So you're looking at total assets of approximately $672,000. That's quite substantial, Mrs. Morrison. With careful management, this could support you very comfortably for many years." $672,000. I'd been living like a pauper, worrying about every grocery bill and utility payment, while sitting on nearly $750,000 in assets. Michael had somehow made me believe I was financially vulnerable, dependent on family support, unable to afford independent living. "What about nursing home costs?" I asked, remembering the figures Michael had quoted to justify the urgency of his plans. "Private pay nursing homes in Brooklyn average about $8,000 per month," Margaret explained. "But Mrs. Morrison, with your assets, you could afford high-quality in-home care for much less if you ever needed it. You have many options." Many options. The phrase felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't realized existed. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't dependent. I wasn't the financial burden Michael had convinced me I was becoming. "I'd like to make some changes to my accounts," I said, surprising myself with my decisiveness. "I want to remove my son Michael as a co-signer on my checking account. I want to update my emergency contacts. And I want to discuss setting up a trust." Margaret's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been approval. "Of course. We can take care of all of that today." For the next hour, I reclaimed control over my financial life. I removed Michael's access to my accounts, changed my PIN numbers, and updated my beneficiary information. Each signature felt like a small declaration of independence, a quiet revolution against the assumption that aging meant surrendering autonomy. The trust was Margaret's suggestion, a way to protect my assets while ensuring they'd be distributed according to my wishes, not someone else's interpretation of what was practical or fair. "You can specify exactly how you want your estate handled," she explained, "and you can change the terms at any time while you're competent to make decisions." Competent. The word Michael had used as a threat. But here, in this professional setting, it simply meant what it had always meant: capable of making my own choices. When I left the bank, I felt lighter than I had in months, not because I'd suddenly become wealthy, but because I'd remembered that I had power, financial power, legal power, the power to make decisions about my own life without anyone else's permission. My next stop was Dr. Martinez's office. If Michael was going to challenge my competency, I wanted medical documentation of my actual mental state, not his interpretation of my confusion and paranoia. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 12 years, a competent woman in her 50s who'd helped me through Frank's final illness and my own recovery from knee surgery. She greeted me with the same concern she'd shown during my darkest days after Frank's death. "Dorothy, you look better than you have in months," she said, settling into her chair. "Your color is good. Your posture is stronger. What's changed?" "I've stopped letting my family make decisions for me," I said, and then surprised myself by laughing. "I know that probably sounds crazy." "It doesn't sound crazy at all. It sounds healthy. Tell me what's been going on." I explained the situation, the nursing home pressure, the financial planning without my input, the threats about legal competency. Dr. Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. "Dorothy, I want to be very clear about something," she said when I finished. "From a medical perspective, you are completely competent to make your own decisions. You're physically healthy for your age, your cognitive function is normal, and you're managing your daily activities independently. There is no medical reason for you to require supervised care. But what about the things Michael mentioned? Forgetting the garbage cans, being late on bills? Those are normal life events that happen to people of all ages. They're not symptoms of dementia or incompetence. They're symptoms of stress, which is perfectly understandable given what you've been dealing with." She typed something into her computer, then printed out a document. "I'm going to give you a letter stating your current mental and physical status. If anyone questions your competency, you'll have medical documentation to support your position." The letter was like armor, protection against the legal threats Michael had made. I folded it carefully and placed it in my purse next to my updated bank statements. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called my old friend Ruth, who'd moved to Florida after her husband died. We'd lost touch gradually, the way friendships sometimes do when life becomes overwhelming and complicated. "Dorothy," Ruth's voice was warm and surprised. "I was just thinking about you. How are you doing?" "I'm doing better than I have in a long time," I said, and realized it was true. "Ruth, I need to ask you something. Do you remember how I used to be? Before Frank died, before I started diminishing myself? Oh, honey, you were a force of nature. You organized the library fundraisers, ran the church bake sales, kept track of everyone's birthdays and anniversaries. You were the one we all went to when we needed something done right. A force of nature." I'd forgotten that version of myself, the woman who'd been capable and confident and indispensable to her community. Somewhere along the way, I'd started seeing myself through Michael's eyes, as a burden, a problem, a woman whose best years were behind her. "Ruth, can I ask you something else? Do you think I'm too old to travel?" "Travel?" "Dorothy, I just got back from a cruise to Alaska. I'm planning a trip to Ireland next spring. Age is just a number, honey. The question is, where do you want to go? Where did I want to go?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I'd spent so many years focused on what I should do, what was practical, what was expected, that I'd forgotten to ask what I wanted. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't thought about what I want in so long. I'm not sure I remember how." "Then that's where you start," Ruth said. "Not with what you should do or what other people think you should do. Start with what makes you happy." After we hung up, I sat in my living room in my house, surrounded by my things, and tried to remember what happiness felt like. Not the happiness of pleasing others or meeting expectations, but the deep satisfaction of living according to my own values and desires. I thought about the letter in my purse, the bank statements that proved my financial independence, the friend who'd reminded me that I used to be a force of nature. I thought about the afternoon I'd spent making decisions for myself, speaking up for myself, claiming my right to exist on my own terms. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up anxious about phone calls or visits or demands for my attention. I slept the deep, restorative sleep of someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Frank died. I was going to do something I'd never done in my adult life. I was going to live for myself. I started small. I bought groceries I wanted to eat, not just whatever was cheapest or most practical. I arranged fresh flowers in every room, not because I was expecting company, but because they made me happy. I played music Frank and I had loved, music Michael had always said was too loud or too old-fashioned. I called the local community college and asked about their senior audit program. I'd always wanted to take an art class, to learn watercolor painting, to explore the creativity I'd suppressed for decades while focusing on everyone else's needs. "We have a wonderful watercolor class starting next week," the registrar said. "It's specifically designed for beginners. Would you be interested?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. I would be very interested. That afternoon, I drove to the art supply store and bought everything on the class supply list: paints, brushes, paper, a tackle box to organize my materials. Each purchase felt like a small act of rebellion against the version of myself that had been deemed too old, too confused, too much trouble to invest in. As I unpacked my art supplies at home, arranging them on the kitchen table where I'd once helped my children with homework, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not anxiety about what others might demand of me, but excitement about what I might discover about myself. The phone rang. Michael's number appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment, my old habits of guilt and obligation stirred to life. But then I remembered the letter in my purse, the money in my accounts, the art supplies on my table. I let it ring. The voicemail he left was predictably manipulative. "Mom, I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I've been researching alternatives to Sunset Manor. Maybe we can find something that works better for everyone. Call me back." Alternatives. Something that works better for everyone. The same controlling language disguised as compromise. The same assumption that my future was his to negotiate. I deleted the message without calling back. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my new watercolor set, following the basic exercises in the instruction book. My first attempts were clumsy, the colors bleeding together in ways I hadn't intended. But there was something profoundly satisfying about the process, about creating something beautiful just because I wanted to. As I painted, I thought about the woman Ruth had described, the force of nature who'd organized fundraisers and coordinated community events. I thought about the woman who'd raised 3 children, supported a husband through military service, and managed a household on a modest budget for 50 years. That woman hadn't been weak or confused or incompetent. She'd been strong, capable, and effective. She'd been someone who solved problems instead of being treated as one. She'd been someone worth fighting for. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was winning. Not because I'd defeated Michael and Sarah. They were still out there, still planning, still convinced they knew what was best for me. But because I'd remembered who I was before I'd let them define me. I was Dorothy Morrison, 73 years old, financially independent, medically competent, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my own life. And I was just getting started. 2 weeks into my newfound freedom, they ambushed me. I was coming home from my second watercolor class, my heart still light from the praise my instructor had given me for my painting of autumn leaves, when I found 3 cars in my driveway: Michael's black sedan, Sarah's white SUV, and a vehicle I didn't recognize, a silver Honda with government plates. My stomach dropped. Through my living room window, I could see figures moving around inside my house. They had keys. They were already in. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine running, considering whether to simply drive away and never come back. But this was my home. These were my belongings, my memories, my life. I wouldn't be driven from it without a fight. The moment I opened my front door, Michael appeared from the kitchen, his face a mask of false concern mixed with barely contained anger. Behind him stood Sarah, Tommy, Emma, and a woman in a business suit carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Mom, thank God you're home," Michael said, his voice carrying the careful modulation he used during difficult client negotiations. We've been worried sick about you. Worried about me? You're in my house without permission. I still have my key, Michael said, holding it up like evidence in a court case. And given your recent behavior, we felt it was necessary to check on your welfare. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Janet Walsh from Adult Protective Services. We received a call expressing concerns about your ability to live independently and safely. Adult Protective Services. The words hit me like a physical blow. Michael had called APS, the government agency that investigated elder abuse and neglect. He'd reported his own mother as a case of self-neglect, a danger to herself requiring intervention. What concerns? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Reports of confusion, paranoid behavior, inability to maintain your home, and refusal to accept necessary medical care, Janet Walsh recited from her clipboard. We're here to conduct a welfare check and assess your living situation. I'm not confused, paranoid, or unable to maintain my home, and I don't need medical care. Mom, look at this place, Sarah said, gesturing around my living room. The dust, the clutter, the way you've been living. It's not normal for someone your age. I looked around my living room, seeing it through their eyes for the first time. Yes, there was dust on some surfaces. I'd been focused on art classes and reclaiming my life instead of obsessive housekeeping. Yes, there were books and papers scattered around. I'd been reading and researching my financial options, but it was hardly the hoarding situation or health hazard they were implying. This is a lived-in home, I said, not a museum. Mrs. Morrison, Janet Walsh continued, we also received reports that you've been making erratic financial decisions, removing family members from your accounts, and expressing paranoid delusions about your family's motives. I removed my son from my accounts because I discovered he'd been planning to liquidate my assets without my knowledge or consent. That's not paranoid. That's protective. Michael's face flushed. Mom, we showed you the emails because we wanted to be transparent about our planning process. We were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves. You spent months planning my institutionalization without including me in the conversation. Because we knew you'd react exactly like this, Sarah snapped, her professional composure finally cracking. We knew you'd be irrational and resistant to getting the help you obviously need. What help do I obviously need? Mom, you forgot to pick up Emma from school last week, Michael said, playing what he clearly considered his trump card. I stared at him, genuinely confused. I was never asked to pick up Emma from school. You were, Emma said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I called you Tuesday afternoon and asked if you could get me because Mom was stuck in a meeting. Emma, honey, I wasn't home Tuesday afternoon. I was at my art class from 2 to 5. See? Michael said to Janet Walsh. She doesn't remember. She's forgetting conversations, forgetting commitments. She's becoming a danger to herself and others. But I did remember Tuesday afternoon. I remembered mixing colors and trying to capture the way light fell across water. I remembered my instructor, Mrs. Chen, complimenting my brushwork. I remembered stopping at the grocery store afterward to buy fresh salmon for dinner, a small luxury I'd allowed myself as part of my new independence. I have my class roster, I said, pulling out my phone. I can prove I was at the community college Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Morrison, Janet Walsh said gently, sometimes people in the early stages of cognitive decline can appear very functional while still experiencing significant memory issues. Early stages of cognitive decline. The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. They'd constructed a narrative of my deterioration so complete, so convincing, that even a trained professional was ready to accept it without question. I want to see the report, I said. I want to know exactly what you were told, and by whom. Janet Walsh hesitated, then opened her file. The report was filed by your son, Michael Morrison, who expressed concerns about your mental state following a family meeting where you became agitated and made threats to disown family members. I didn't threaten to disown anyone. I refused to be forced into a nursing home. The report also mentions that you've been isolating yourself from family, refusing to answer phone calls, and making erratic financial decisions without consulting family members who've been helping manage your affairs. Every word was technically true, but completely stripped of context. Yes, I'd been screening my calls, Because every conversation with Michael had become a negotiation about my surrender. Yes, I'd made financial decisions without consulting him, because they were my decisions to make. Yes, I'd been less available to my family, because I'd been building a life for myself instead of existing solely for their convenience. "I'd like to speak with Mrs. Morrison privately," Janet Walsh said. "Family members, if you could please wait outside." "We're not leaving," Michael said firmly. "She's clearly not thinking rationally. She needs advocates present." "Mr. Morrison, I need to assess your mother's mental state independently. Please wait on the porch." After they filed out, Janet Walsh settled into Frank's chair and opened her notepad. "Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that our goal is to help you live safely and independently for as long as possible. We're not here to remove you from your home unless absolutely necessary." "Then why does it feel like I'm being auditioned for my own life?" Janet Walsh smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Because you are, in a way. Tell me about your daily routine. How do you manage your medications, your meals, your household tasks?" For the next hour, I walked her through my life with the detailed precision of someone defending herself against charges she didn't understand. I showed her my pillbox, organized by day and time. I opened my refrigerator, which was well stocked with fresh food. I demonstrated my ability to manage my finances, showed her my bank statements and medical records. "Mrs. Morrison, can you tell me what day it is?" "It's Thursday, November 2nd, 2023. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon. You arrived approximately an hour ago with my son, who called Adult Protective Services because I refused to move into a nursing home. Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, 2. Would you like me to continue into negative numbers? That won't be necessary. Can you tell me the names of the last 3 presidents? Biden, Trump, Obama. Before that, Bush, Clinton, the other Bush, Reagan, Carter. Should I keep going?" Janet Walsh was taking notes, but her expression had shifted from professional concern to something closer to bewilderment. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, do you understand why your family is concerned about you?" "Because I stopped being convenient. Because I stopped saying yes to everything they wanted and started making decisions for myself. Because I discovered they'd been planning my institutionalization for months without including me in the conversation. And you feel this was done maliciously?" "I feel it was done selfishly. They want me safely warehoused so they can get on with their lives without the inconvenience of dealing with an aging parent." Janet Walsh closed her notepad. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on my assessment, I see no evidence of cognitive decline, self-neglect, or inability to live independently. Your home is clean and well-maintained. You're articulate, oriented, and managing your affairs competently." Relief flooded through me like warm water. "So you'll close the case?" "I'll recommend that no further action is necessary at this time. However, I want you to understand that this investigation will remain on file. If additional reports are filed about your welfare, we'll have to investigate those as well." Additional reports. The threat was clear. Michael could call APS again and again, each time creating a paper trail of concerns that would eventually build a case for intervention. "I understand," I said. When Janet Walsh left, Michael and Sarah returned with faces that could have been carved from stone. Emma looked relieved, while Tommy seemed more interested in his phone than the family drama unfolding around him. "Well?" Michael demanded. "She's competent," Janet Walsh said simply. "There's no evidence of cognitive decline or self-neglect. Case closed." "That's impossible," Sarah said. "She's clearly not thinking rationally." "Ma'am, disagreeing with your preferences isn't evidence of mental illness. Your mother has the right to make decisions about her own life, even if those decisions seem unwise to you." After Janet Walsh left, the 5 of us stood in my living room like survivors of a natural disaster, unsure how to proceed now that the crisis had passed without the resolution Michael had been counting on. "This isn't over," Michael said quietly. "I'm going to contact a lawyer about guardianship proceedings. If you won't accept help voluntarily, we'll have to explore other options." "Michael, stop!" Emma's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Just stop. We all turned to look at her. My 17-year-old granddaughter, who'd been silent through most of this ordeal, was staring at her father with an expression of disgust and disappointment. "Dad, I listened to everything that woman said. Grandma answered every question perfectly. She's not confused or dangerous or incompetent. She's just sick of being treated like a child." "Emma, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You want to put Grandma in a nursing home so you don't have to worry about her anymore. You want to sell her house and spend her money so you don't have to deal with taking care of her when she gets older. You called the government on your own mother because she wouldn't do what you wanted. That's not true." "It is true. And it's disgusting." Emma turned to me, her eyes bright with tears. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I believed them when they said you were confused. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner." She walked over and hugged me, and I felt something break open in my chest. Not with pain this time, but with hope. Here was one person who could still see me as a person instead of a problem. "Emma, we should go," Sarah said, clearly uncomfortable with her daughter's rebellion. "No," Emma said, pulling back from our embrace but keeping her hands on my shoulders. "I'm staying with Grandma tonight. I want to hear her side of the story." "Emma, you have school tomorrow." "I'll drive her to school," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "She's welcome to stay as long as she wants." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, recognizing that they'd lost not just the battle, but their daughter's support as well. "Fine," Michael said, "but this conversation isn't over, Mom. I'm still going to explore legal options." "Then I'll explore them too," I said. "I have a very good lawyer now, and I have documentation of my competency from both my doctor and adult protective services." After they left, Emma and I sat in my kitchen while I made tea and tried to process what had just happened. My family had tried to have me declared incompetent, and failed. They'd involved the government in their attempt to control me and been rebuffed. They'd shown their true colors so clearly that even my teenage granddaughter could see them. "Grandma," Emma said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Dad's been practicing what he was going to say to that woman for weeks. He had Mom call all the neighbors to ask if they'd noticed anything strange about you. He even asked me to lie about the phone call." "The phone call about picking you up from school?" "There was no phone call. Dad made that up. He said if I backed him up, it would help prove you needed supervision." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt tired. Tired of fighting people who would lie to government officials, manipulate their own children, and destroy their mother's reputation to get what they wanted. "Why didn't you go along with it?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Because I remembered something. Last Christmas, when I was really sick with the flu, you came over and took care of me for 3 days. You slept in the chair next to my bed, made me soup, read me stories even though I was too old for them. You took care of me like I was the most important person in the world." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And I realized that if I helped them put you in a nursing home, I'd be just as bad as they are. I'd be someone who threw away the person who'd loved me most." That night, after Emma had gone to sleep in the guest room, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of my victory. The watercolor painting I'd started that afternoon sat on the easel by the window, still wet and bright with possibility. My art supplies were spread across the coffee table where Sarah had once laid out nursing home brochures. I'd won. I'd fought for my right to exist on my own terms, and I'd won. But the victory felt hollow because I knew it was temporary. Michael would regroup, find new strategies, new ways to undermine my independence. He'd learned that direct confrontation wouldn't work, but he was a lawyer. He knew how to find other approaches. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had an ally. Emma had chosen to see me as a person worth protecting instead of a problem to be solved. And that gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could teach my family to see me that way too. Or maybe I'd finally learned that their opinion of me mattered less than my opinion of myself. Either way, I was still Dorothy Morrison, 73 years old, living in my own home, making my own decisions, and refusing to surrender my dignity to anyone who demanded it. And that felt like victory enough. 3 months after the APS investigation, I was standing in the Riverside Community Center, surrounded by 50 of my watercolor paintings hanging on professional gallery walls. The opening reception for Late Bloom's A Senior Artist's Journey was in full swing, and I could barely recognize the confident woman in the navy blue dress who was greeting visitors and discussing her artwork with genuine enthusiasm. Emma stood beside me, beaming with pride as she watched strangers examine my paintings with serious appreciation. "Grandma, look at this," she whispered, pointing to a small red dot sticker that had appeared next to my painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. Someone bought it. My first sale. At 73 years old, I'd sold my first piece of art to a complete stranger who valued my work enough to pay money for it. The feeling was intoxicating, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. I was creating something worth having, something that brought beauty into the world instead of simply occupying space in it. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After Emma's revelation about Michael's lies, I'd spent weeks in a kind of emotional freefall, unsure how to rebuild a sense of self that had been systematically dismantled over years of subtle manipulation. But Emma had stayed with me through those difficult days, helping me remember who I'd been before I'd allowed myself to be diminished. "You used to paint when I was little," she'd reminded me one afternoon as we went through old photo albums. "Remember? You had that easel set up in the guest room and you'd let me help mix colors." I did remember, vaguely. Before Frank's illness, before the stress of caregiving consumed every moment of my life, I'd dabbled in watercolors as a hobby. Nothing serious, nothing I'd ever imagined could become more than a pleasant way to spend Sunday afternoons. "What happened to those paintings?" Emma had asked. I'd found them in the basement, stored in a cardboard box between Christmas decorations and Frank's military memorabilia. 20-year-old attempts at landscapes and still lifes, amateurish but earnest, evidence of a creative spirit I'd forgotten I possessed. "These are beautiful, Grandma," Emma had said, spreading them across my kitchen table. "You should start painting again. I'm too old to start over." "You're not starting over. You're continuing where you left off." So I'd continued. What began as a weekly community college class became daily practice, then passionate obsession. I painted the view from my kitchen window at different times of day, capturing the way light moved across my garden through the seasons. I painted Emma's face as she slept in the guest room, peaceful and trusting in a way that reminded me why fighting for my independence had been worth it. I painted Frank's hands from memory, weathered and strong, the hands that had built our life together. Mrs. Chen, my instructor, had been the first to suggest I might have real talent. "Dorothy, you have an unusual ability to capture emotion in your brushwork," she'd said during our 6th class. "Have you ever considered showing your work?" The idea had seemed ridiculous at first. I was a 73-year-old beginner, not a real artist. But Mrs. Chen had persisted, eventually connecting me with the director of the Riverside Community Center, who ran monthly exhibitions featuring local artists. "We'd love to showcase your work," Director Martinez had said after reviewing my portfolio. "Your paintings have a quality of lived experience that's very compelling. They tell stories. The stories my paintings told were stories of resilience, of beauty found in unexpected places, of a woman learning to see herself as worthy of time and attention and creative expression." Each brushstroke was an act of defiance against the voice in my head that whispered I was too old, too late, too much trouble to invest in. The exhibition had been Emma's idea. "Grandma, you have 40 paintings now. People should see them. They should know what you're capable of." What I was capable of. The phrase had terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. For so long, I'd defined myself by my limitations, my age, my supposed inconvenience to others. The idea that I might be capable of something beautiful, something valuable, something worth celebrating felt revolutionary. "Dorothy, I'd like you to meet someone," Mrs. Chen said, approaching with an elegant woman in her 60s, who moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "This is Patricia Williams from the Brooklyn Arts Council." Patricia extended her hand with a warm smile. "Mrs. Morrison, your work is extraordinary. I'm particularly drawn to your series on solitude, the way you've captured both the pain and the peace of being alone. It's very moving." The Solitude series. 5 paintings I'd completed during my darkest period, when the silence in my house had felt like both punishment and sanctuary. I'd painted my empty kitchen at dawn, the light soft and forgiving. My living room at twilight, shadows creating pockets of contemplation. My bedroom at midnight, moonlight transforming loneliness into something almost sacred. "Thank you," I said, still uncomfortable with praise, but learning to accept it gracefully. I wasn't sure anyone would understand what I was trying to express. "I think anyone who's ever been dismissed because of their age would understand perfectly," Patricia said. "There's a whole population of older adults who've been made to feel invisible. Your paintings give voice to that experience." Give voice. The idea that my art could speak for others, could represent experiences beyond my own, made my heart race with something between terror and possibility. "I'd like to discuss including some of your work in our upcoming exhibition on aging and identity," Patricia continued. "It's going to be displayed at the Brooklyn Museum next spring." The Brooklyn Museum. I felt Emma's hand squeeze my arm as the magnitude of the opportunity sank in. My paintings, my amateur attempts at artistic expression, deemed worthy of inclusion in a real museum exhibition. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Emma whispered fiercely. "Say yes, Grandma." "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "Yes, I'd be honored." As Patricia moved on to examine other paintings, Emma pulled me into a hug that smelled like her strawberry shampoo and youthful optimism. "Grandma, you're going to be in a museum. Wait until I tell everyone at school." The evening progressed in a blur of conversations with strangers who saw me not as a burden or a problem to be managed, but as an artist worth knowing. A retired teacher bought my painting of autumn leaves for her classroom. A young couple purchased my portrait of Frank's hands for their first apartment. Each sale felt like validation that I had something worth offering the world. Near the end of the reception, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance, studying my paintings with an expression I couldn't quite read. Michael had come. He'd arrived alone, without Sarah or Tommy, dressed in his usual expensive suit but looking somehow diminished in the bright, celebratory atmosphere of the gallery. When our eyes met across the room, I saw something I'd never seen in his face before: uncertainty. He approached slowly, stopping in front of my largest painting, a self-portrait I'd completed just weeks earlier. I'd painted myself in my garden, surrounded by the roses Frank had planted, my hands dirty with soil, my face peaceful and determined. It was the most honest representation of myself I'd ever attempted. "It's beautiful, Mom," he said quietly. "They're all beautiful. Thank you." We stood in awkward silence, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built for myself after rejecting his plans for my future. The paintings told the story of my transformation from someone who saw herself as a burden to someone who recognized her own worth. "I didn't know you could paint like this," Michael said finally. "Neither did I. I never had time to find out before." He studied the self-portrait more closely, taking in details I'd painted from memory: the wedding ring I still wore, the reading glasses perched on my nose, the small smile that suggested contentment rather than resignation. "Mom, I owe you an apology." The words hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. "For which part?" "For all of it. For treating you like a problem instead of a person. For assuming I knew what was best for you without asking what you wanted. For calling APS. For lying to the investigator?" His face flushed. "Emma told you. Emma told me everything, including the part where you asked her to lie for you." Michael looked around the gallery, at the red dots indicating sold paintings, at the visitors still examining my work with serious attention. "I was wrong. About everything. You're not declining or confused or unable to take care of yourself. You're thriving." "I am. And I almost destroyed that because I was too afraid to see it." "Afraid of what?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, his lawyer's composure finally cracking to reveal something more human underneath. "Afraid of losing you. Afraid of having to watch you age and decline and eventually die? I thought if I could control the process, make it neat and predictable and safe, maybe it wouldn't hurt as much. So you tried to bury me before I was dead. I tried to protect myself from the pain of losing you by pushing you away first, and in the process, I almost lost you anyway." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the controlling adversary who'd tried to institutionalize me, but a middle-aged man terrified of watching his mother age and die. His cruelty had come from fear, his manipulation from a desperate desire to avoid the grief that was inevitable if he allowed himself to love me fully. Michael, I'm going to age. I'm going to decline. I'm eventually going to die. That's not something you can prevent by warehousing me in a nursing home. I know that now. The question is whether you want to spend whatever time we have left fighting about how I should live it, or whether you want to actually be part of my life. He studied the self-portrait again, and I could see him processing the woman in the painting. Strong, creative, purposeful, alive. Not the burden he'd constructed in his mind, but the mother who'd raised him, loved him, and somehow survived his attempts to control her. I want to be part of your life, he said finally, if you'll let me. That depends. Are you going to respect my choices, even when they're not what you would choose for me? Yes. Are you going to stop treating my independence like a threat to your peace of mind? Yes. Are you going to remember that loving someone means wanting them to be happy, not just safe? Yes. I nodded toward Emma, who was across the room enthusiastically explaining my painting technique to a group of visitors. Your daughter figured that out before you did. Emma's wiser than I am. Always has been. She gets that from her grandmother, I said. And for the first time in months, I saw Michael smile genuinely. Can I ask you something, Mom? What? What's next? What do you want to do now that you've discovered you're an artist? The question filled me with excitement rather than anxiety. What did I want to do? For the first time in my adult life, the answer didn't depend on what others needed from me or expected of me. I want to paint more. I want to travel and paint landscapes I've never seen. I want to teach art classes for other seniors who think they're too old to learn something new. I want to write about this experience, about what it's like to discover yourself at 73. That sounds wonderful. And I want to have a relationship with my family based on who we actually are, not who we think we should be. Michael nodded, his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. I'd like that too. As the reception wound down and the last visitors departed, I stood in the empty gallery surrounded by my paintings and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not the fierce, protective pride of a mother defending her children, but the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd fought for her right to exist on her own terms and won. Emma appeared at my side, tired but glowing with excitement. Grandma, 12 paintings sold. 12. You're officially a professional artist now. A professional artist. At 73 years old, I'd achieved something I'd never dreamed possible. But more than that, I'd reclaimed my right to dream at all. That night, as I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and my latest painting propped on the easel before me, I thought about the woman who'd answered her door 3 months earlier to find her son calling her a mess. That woman had been broken, diminished, ready to surrender her independence to people who saw her as a burden. I was not that woman anymore. I was Dorothy Morrison, 73 years old, artist, survivor, and the author of my own story. And I was just getting started. 1 year later, I'm sitting in a cafe in Tuscany, Italy, sketching olive trees in the golden morning light while my coffee grows cold beside me. The watercolor set Emma gave me for my 74th birthday is spread across the small wooden table, and I'm completely absorbed in capturing the way shadows dance across ancient stone walls. Scusi, signora, you are artist? I look up to find an elderly Italian man watching me work, his weathered face kind and curious. 6 months ago, I would have laughed at the question. Today, I smile and nod. Sì, sono un artista. Yes, I am an artist. The words still feel miraculous in my mouth, but they no longer feel foreign. I am Dorothy Morrison, 74 years old, and I am living the life I never dared to dream possible. The journey to this cafe in Tuscany began 4 months after my first art exhibition, when I made a decision that would have terrified the woman I used to be. I booked a solo trip to Europe, 3 weeks of painting workshops in Italy and France, staying in small villages where no one knew me as anything other than the American artist with the beautiful watercolors. Michael had been worried, of course. Mom, are you sure you want to travel alone? What if something happens? What if you get lost or sick or need help? But his concern felt different now, genuine care rather than controlling manipulation. And when I'd explained that this trip was something I needed to do for myself, something that would feed my soul and expand my artistic vision, he'd surprised me. "Then you should absolutely go," he'd said, "and I want to pay for it." "Michael, I can afford—" "I know you can, but I want to do this. Consider it an apology gift for all the dreams I almost stole from you." The trip had been everything I'd hoped and more. I'd painted sunrise over the Roman Forum, sunset over the Seine, the lavender fields of Provence in full bloom. I'd eaten meals alone without feeling lonely, struck up conversations with strangers in broken languages, and discovered that the world was full of people eager to connect with someone who approached life with curiosity and openness. But more than the places I'd seen or the paintings I'd created, the trip had taught me something profound. I was not only capable of taking care of myself, I was capable of thriving. At 74, I was still learning, still growing, still becoming. Now, as I add delicate washes of yellow ochre to my olive tree painting, I think about all the moments that led me here, the devastating discovery of those emails, the humiliation of the APS investigation, the slow, difficult work of rebuilding my sense of self-worth, the first tentative brushstrokes that became confident artistic expression. My phone buzzes with a text from Emma. "Grandma, got into Columbia, art history major. Can't wait to tell you everything when you get home." I smile, remembering the conversation we'd had 6 months ago when Emma was struggling to choose a college major. "I want to study art history," she'd said, "but Mom thinks it's impractical. She says I should major in business or pre-med, something with better job prospects." "What do you want?" I'd asked. "I want to understand how art moves people. I want to work in museums and help people connect with beautiful things. I want to do something that matters, not just something that pays well." "Then do that." "But what if Mom's right? What if I can't make a living?" I'd looked at my granddaughter, brilliant, passionate, 18 years old with her whole life ahead of her, and seen myself at her age, choosing the safe path instead of the one that called to my heart. "Emma, I spent 50 years believing that practical was more important than passionate. I convinced myself that sacrifice was the same as love, that giving up my dreams was proof of my devotion to family. And you know what I learned?" "What?" "I learned that a life lived only for others isn't really a life at all. It's just existence. And the people you're sacrificing for don't actually benefit from your martyrdom. They just learn to take your unhappiness for granted." "So you think I should study art history?" "I think you should study whatever makes you feel the way I feel when I'm painting. Like you're exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you were meant to do." Now Emma is following her passion, and I couldn't be prouder. She's also become my unofficial business manager, helping me set up a website to sell my paintings and coordinating with galleries interested in my work. My art has become more than personal expression. It's become a bridge between us, a shared language of creativity and courage. The Italian man is still standing beside my table, and I realize he's been waiting patiently for me to finish my brushstroke. "Your painting, it is very beautiful," he says in careful English. "You capture the spirit of the trees, not just the appearance." "Grazie," I reply, then surprise myself by continuing in English. "I'm learning that painting isn't about making things look perfect. It's about showing how they feel." He nods enthusiastically. See, art is feeling, not just seeing. You understand this. Many young artists, they try to make everything too perfect, too controlled. But you let the paint be free. Let the paint be free. The phrase resonates with something deep in my chest. For decades, I'd tried to control every aspect of my life, to be the perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect woman who never caused problems or asked for too much. I'd held myself so tightly that I'd nearly suffocated my own spirit. Learning to paint had taught me to let go, to allow for happy accidents and unexpected beauty. A brush loaded with too much water might create exactly the soft edge I needed. A color that seemed wrong might turn out to be perfect when it dried. Mistakes weren't failures. They were opportunities for discovery. The same was true of life, I'd learned. My refusal to go quietly into that nursing home had seemed like a mistake to Michael and Sarah, a stubborn rejection of practical solutions. But it had led to this moment, this life, this version of myself I'd never known existed. My phone rings, and I see Michael's name on the screen. 6 months ago, His calls had filled me with dread. Now I answer with genuine pleasure. "Hi, sweetheart. How's Italy treating you?" "Like a long-lost friend," I say, holding up my painting so he can see it through the video call. "Look what I painted this morning." "Mom, that's incredible. You can actually feel the heat of the sun and the age of those trees. You're getting so good at this." His pride in my accomplishments feels genuine now, free of the patronizing undertone that used to make me feel diminished. We've been building a new relationship slowly, carefully, based on who we actually are rather than who we thought we should be. "How's Sarah?" I ask. "She's good. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry about last Christmas." Last Christmas had been our first attempt at spending the holiday together since the APS incident. Sarah had tried to be supportive of my new life, but old habits die hard. She'd spent the day making small comments about my artistic phase and wondering when I might settle down into more age-appropriate activities. "What's age-appropriate about giving up on joy?" I'd asked, and Sarah had gone quiet for the rest of the evening. "She's learning," Michael continues. "We all are. It's hard to unlearn years of thinking we knew what was best for you. The important thing is that you're trying." Speaking of trying, I have something to tell you. Sarah and I are going to start marriage counseling. This surprises me. "Really?" Your whole transformation made us realize that we've been making a lot of assumptions about what makes people happy. Sarah's been as controlling with me and the kids as I was with you. We want to learn how to love each other without trying to manage each other. I think about this as I clean my brushes in the small glass of water. My refusal to be controlled hadn't just changed my life. It had created ripples that were transforming my entire family. Emma was pursuing her passion instead of the practical path. Michael was examining his own relationships and communication patterns. Even Sarah was questioning whether her need to control came from love or from fear. "I'm proud of you," I tell him. "For what?" "For being brave enough to change. For admitting when you're wrong. For choosing growth over comfort." After we hang up, I sit in the Italian sunshine and think about the woman I was a year ago. The Dorothy who'd believed her family's assessment of her worth, who'd been ready to surrender her independence rather than fight for her dignity. That woman feels like a stranger to me now. Someone I remember with compassion, but no longer recognize as myself. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been nights when I'd doubted myself, days when the old voices of guilt and obligation had whispered that I was being selfish, moments when the loneliness of standing up for myself had felt almost unbearable. But every painting I'd completed, every boundary I'd maintained, every choice I'd made for my own happiness had strengthened my resolve. I'd learned that self-respect wasn't selfish. It was essential. I'd discovered that love without respect was just manipulation dressed in prettier clothes. As I pack up my art supplies and prepare to head back to my small hotel, I think about the email I'd received yesterday from Patricia Williams at the Brooklyn Arts Council. The museum exhibition featuring my work had been so successful that they wanted to organize a solo show, an entire gallery dedicated to my paintings, my story, my late-blooming artistic career. "We want to call it Never Too Late, the Dorothy Morrison story," Patricia had written. "Your journey from overlooked senior citizen to celebrated artist is inspiring people across the country. We've had inquiries from seniors who want to know if they're too old to start painting, too old to chase dreams, too old to stand up for themselves. Your story is giving them permission to believe in their own possibilities. Never too late." The phrase had made me cry, not with sadness but with joy at the recognition that my struggle had meaning beyond my own happiness. If my refusal to disappear quietly could inspire even one other person to claim their right to dignity and creative expression, then every difficult moment had been worth it. That evening, I sit on the terrace of my hotel, sipping wine and watching the sun set over the Tuscan countryside. Tomorrow I'll fly home to Brooklyn, to my house that's now filled with art supplies and finished paintings instead of the ghostly outlines of furniture that had been taken away. I'll return to my watercolor classes, my growing circle of artist friends, my weekly dinners with Emma, who still prefers my company to most people her own age. I'll go back to being Dorothy Morrison, 74 years old, artist, survivor, and the author of her own story. But I'll also be something I never was before. a woman who knows her own worth, who refuses to apologize for taking up space in the world, who understands that aging is not about diminishing gracefully, but about living fully until the very end. As the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, I raise my glass of wine in a toast to the woman I used to be, the one who endured decades of diminishment and still had enough fight left to reclaim her life. And I toast the woman I've become, fearless, creative, unapologetically herself. But mostly, I toast the possibility that exists in every moment, at every age, for transformation and renewal, and the courage to choose joy over safety, authenticity over approval, and the beautiful uncertainty of living over the safe predictability of merely existing. Because it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Never too late to surprise yourself with your own strength. Never too late to paint your own masterpiece. And if you're listening to this story and recognizing parts of your own life in mine, if you're feeling overlooked or undervalued or pressured to make yourself smaller to accommodate others' comfort, I want you to know something. You are not too old, too late, or too much trouble to fight for. Your dreams matter. Your happiness matters. Your right to make choices about your own life matters. Have you ever felt like you had to choose between keeping peace with your family and staying true to yourself? Have you ever been made to feel like your age disqualified you from pursuing new dreams or defending your dignity? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter to me. And if this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel, because somewhere out there is someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to bloom, and your engagement helps make sure this message reaches them. Until next time, remember, you're never too old to surprise yourself with your own strength.